So calling your attention to April 2nd of 2021 at approximately 3:48 p.m. was a patient brought to the emergency room named Corey Michello.
Yes.
And can you tell the court who brought Corey into the emergency room?
Chris Gregor.
And ultimately, did you learn the relationship of Chris Gregor and Corey?
Yes.
And can you tell the jurors what the relationship was?
Chris Gregor is Corey's father, and Corey is Chris's son.
And where were you when you first saw Mr. Gregor with Corey?
I was in the waiting room. I was speaking to another patient at the time. I'm right near the door speaking to another patient. I did not hear any commotion. I did not hear any urgent sound that would redirect my attention. A registrar came up to me and said, "Bill, you have to look at this." So I went over to Corey, and he was in the arms of Chris at the waiting room entrance, or just past the waiting room entrance near the desk.
Now, the first time that you observed the defendant with Corey, can you explain to the jurors the position of Corey in relation to the defendant?
Corey was over. Corey was in Chris's arms. His arms were over Chris's shoulders. His legs were dangling. His arms did not look like they had much movement to them. His legs did not look like they had much movement to him. His head was rested on Chris's shoulder. His head was his face was difficult to visualize. So when I first approached them, I knew that something was concerning, but I couldn't see everything I needed to see. So I was depending on Chris to convey a sense of urgency or unwellness that I did not get from him at first. It was more of a clinical description of what was going on, and I did not immediately feel I had to rush them back. I definitely knew it was concerning, but I needed just a little more information. If I saw Corey's face right away, it would have been much easier, but Corey's face was on Chris's shoulder.
So the first time that you made this observation, that would be the two of them would have been in the lobby area.
Yes.
And did you approach the defendant in the lobby area of the emergency room?
Yes.
And what immediate observations were you able to make of Corey in the lobby area?
So I went over to them, and I was splitting my attention between Chris and Corey. What I could tell was that there wasn't a lot of spontaneous movement from Corey. He was not really moving on his own. He appeared to have a lack of tone to his muscles, and there was a lot of support coming from Chris in keeping him in the position that he was in.
Did you speak to the defendant in the lobby area of the emergency room?
Yes.
And would this be a practice or a common practice to engage in something like that?
Yes.
And can you tell the jurors what the defendant said?
Chris told me that he introduced himself, who he was. He was the father, he was the son, and he told me that this was around 3, nearly 4 p.m. He told me that earlier in the day, around 9 a.m., his son was dropped off to him, was with his mother the night before. He did tell me that the patient was at Jersey Shore University Hospital and had a workup and was discharged. And just a side note, once you hear that, less than 12 hours later, you kind of go, okay, like maybe he's not that sick, so I need more information, so talk more. So Chris told me that earlier that morning he appeared loopy, he was very drowsy, and he put him to bed. And later in the afternoon, Corey continued to be loopy and drowsy. And when all that time passed and he was still fatigued and not himself, that's when he brought him into the ER. So that's what he told me.
After you made your initial observations and you spoke to the defendant, can you tell the jurors what you did next regarding Corey's care?
Can you repeat the question again? I'm sorry.
I said after you made your observations in the lobby and spoke to the defendant, what did you do next regarding Corey's care?
I continued the history taking, which is pretty standard as a triage nurse to get history from the patient. And I would have spoken to Corey, but he was not in a place to speak. He was not making any sound hardly. I continued my brief conversation with Chris until there was a moment when Corey tilted his head back, and that's when I got what I needed to see to really kick up the speed on this emergency.
So where was Corey taken at that point?
He was taken to the emergency room. Once I saw that, then I rushed it. So I called, his eyes were in the back of his head. He didn't look well. He was pale. I called the charge nurse immediately after that, and then I got a room, and being that Chris was holding him well, I didn't waste time getting a stretcher or a wheelchair. I said, hey, you okay to go to the ER? He goes, yes, and we went to the ER, to room 6, the emergency room.
What room did you go to in the emergency room?
Room 6.
And while you were in room 6 of the emergency room, can you tell the jurors who else came into that room?
So I already alerted help, so they were waiting for me. In that room was various emergency nurses and our ER physician and a patient care tech.
And what, if anything, did the defendant say while you were in room 6?
At that time, now that as a triage nurse, my role was to get them to help, get the patient to help. So at that time, I focused more on Corey than the conversation with Chris. But that's because that our ER physician was speaking with Chris, getting essentially what I just got from Chris. He basically reiterated the story, how he was loopy and tired all day, and how he felt concerned that he didn't kind of shake out of that. So he brought him into the emergency room. He told him about the Jersey Shore hospital visit the night before, but it was more. I was working on Corey at the time.
Okay. And what, if anything, did you do regarding the treatment of Corey?
So we placed him on the heart monitor. Before that, we took off his clothes. That's when I noticed a bruise on his chest, and we still had to act quickly. So we put the heart monitor on him. I got an IV, drew blood from him, while the rest of the team was doing their various roles, including our physician who was talking to Chris.
What was the defendant's demeanor while you were in room 6?
While we were in room 6 was similar to when I first interacted with him in the waiting room. It was I would say it was a clinical aspect in that he was describing what was going on without much more difference than anyone else would, regardless of their role with the person. So he was conveying the information, but there wasn't much more than that.
And after you drew blood from Corey, where did you go after that?
Well, Corey required a lot of attention, so we still had an emergency room to run. So I told the charge nurse, I'll take the charge phone, which handles the ambulances. You focus on this. So I handled the charge nurse and the triage phone, and I went to various things throughout the ER while everyone worked on Corey. He was like an all hands on deck type of situation.
I'm sorry, I could not hear that, Judge.
He was an all hands on deck type of situation.